Hello, welcome to the 15-minute hour. This is Corey, and today I'm joined by Jacob and Calvin.
How are you all doing today?
What's going on, y'all?
What is the topic that we're going to be discussing today, Corey?
Well, from my understanding, today we're going to be discussing Pharmakon, Plato's Pharmakon, and Phaedrus, magic in relationship to religion and orthodoxy, shamanism, and then magic and shamanism's relationship to psychoanalysis.
All right. And before we start, I want to ask this question. When you say magic, I assume you're not talking about like card tricks and stuff. Is that correct?
More or less, yes.
Okay. All right. And then also, what are we drinking today?
Well, today I'm having gin and tonic with Saint Germain's orange and lemon.
Jacob?
I'm just having straight St. Germain's.
And I think I'm having the same thing as
Yes.
Corey.
Yes, you are.
I believe. So if you want to get into an introduction of at least one of the three topics just to start, you can.
Yes, so Plato's Phaedrus is one of his most beautiful works. And basically in that, Plato is talking to this gentleman named Phaedrus. And Phaedrus is an orator, speech connoisseur.
This is the chariot one?
Yes.
Yes.
So a lot of the church fathers borrow that analogy in Phaedrus with the chariot. And it's basically Plato's works. It's one of the only two dialogues, in addition to Republic, at least initially, where Socrates is outside of the city. He's outside of Athens. And Plato has Socrates talking to Phaedrus about Pharmakon, about the gods, about drugs, and about the relationship between Eros and the divine. It's kind of like the sequel to Symposium, if you want to think about it that way. Symposium to Electric Boogaloo. And throughout that, he's talking about Pharmakon and magic. And it's interesting from the Christian perspective, because if you look at the Old Testament, the Septuagint, where it's using the word sorcery, often translated in the King James Version, sorcery, magic, or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's translated from Pharmakon. And Pharmakon is, and this is why to some degree I respect Christian Scientists or Mormons, because if you really understand what magic is in the biblical sense, it's anything dealing with the transformation of the mind, which could very much be coffee, tea, any sort of pharmacological device, which is also why I say like the modern government we live in is not, it's not really to be understood as democracy, it's to be understood as magocracy, which is to say the government of like things like Babylon or Atlantis. Which is to say that we're ruled by a knowledge technocracy based on magic, on Pharmakon, and the pharmacologists determine the production of power and knowledge.
So what would be like examples of ways that the government is using Pharmakon to rule?
Well, it's very easy nowadays with something like COVID. But in general, it's just, and to take a Foucauldian perspective here, that power and the relationship between power and knowledge, and how knowledge is distributed as a way of saying that if you don't agree to this or you disagree to this in biopolitical sense, then you're outcast. You don't have a right to social capital. And this is how we distribute the idea of things like schools or, everything's a prison, right? That's the meme with Foucault. So you don't... Psychiatry, psychology operating as a way of maximum identification within capitalist relations to how you understand power and identity. And you have to be this like good person who does this and this, which is just a recapitalization of Christian, post-Christian values, humanistic values in like liberal democracy or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's how you advance. You have to play the game, play your cards right, and do whatever is the maxim of doing, I guess in the sense of, interpolation. You have to like go with the flow and, appease your masters and be sane. And what sanity is what is ever most productive capitalist relations. You can't have any, so-called conspiracy theories or whatever, so on and so on. So,
yeah.
And when you say magic, can you give
so like when I'm talking to like pagan people, like about Christianity or whatever, and it's like I describe something like prayer to the saints or the Eucharist, and like, oh, it's magic. Well, it's like I'm not going to go around and say it's not magic, because that basically in their understanding it is. And this is the whole thing with magic is like magic is the energy that relates us to spirits that are not immediately perceptible by everyday senses. Magic is a feminine force that we draw through the masculine principle. By masculine principle, I mean active, the free will choice to pray or to do rites or to do ritual. So if you're doing anything in the church or doing anything at all where you're trying to draw the energy of magic into you, or drawing the energy of the passive into you, that is magic. So the discrepancy between what is magic or what is orthodox is pretty artificial, in the same way like the discrepancy between what is pagan or what is orthodox or what is Christian or whatever is mostly artificial. In the sense that these are just the religions coming out of Adam and Adam's descendants that were pointing towards the divine. And also, like I think I spoke before in mythology and history, or the myth of history, what the whole idea to begin with is with this sense of what is history versus mythology. And in that same sense, it's also the same sense of what is magic versus orthodox ritual. And magic is the accruing of power in relation to the ineffable, in relation to the divine. And so the soul always takes on this contrary lunar, solar, feminine, masculine, passive, active aspect in relation to the energies of the divine. And magic is just where you're taking a particularly masculine or active role in relationship to that.
And so I think for some of our viewers who maybe aren't as familiar with the ancient Greek, do we want to explain a little bit more kind of this dualistic masculine, feminine, like solar, lunar concept?
Yeah, the masculine or the solar is what imposes. It's what gives language. It's what gives structure. But the counterpose to that in Plato's Phaedrus is that, well, language itself is a pharmakon, by which it is to say a pharmakon is a ritual or medicine, pharmacology, where you give someone a spirit, alcohol or medicine, whatever, to cast out other spirits. So masculine is the imposition, the raping, the penetration, and the feminine is what receives, or the passive. That's what gets.
When did magic become, modern magic tricks with cards or coins? And rings?
That's a very recent thing, and that's mostly the degeneration. It's an aspect of the degeneration of magic. Where magic is understood as like pure entertainment. It really doesn't have much to do with what actual magic is.
Did it ever have like a transition from a more like spiritual to, card tricks and stuff, or did that just kind of happen overnight? They took the word and ran.
It's mostly from the gypsies, in the same context in which we talked about tarot in the past. It's mostly the same context in that respect, where
basically the gypsies ruin everything cool.
Although to be fair, it's really not even the gypsies' fault, because the gypsies still have some connection to an actual tradition of their culture. I mean, magic tricks is really something. It's influenced by the gypsies, but it's not really the gypsies' fault in the direct sense. Maybe in an indirect sense, but it's a particular watering down of that tradition that comes out of the gypsies.
Okay. The one thing when magic, the earliest memory I had of it was the Bible story where Moses, throws down his staff and it turns into a snake. And the Egyptians are just like, oh yeah, we can do that. And I was always confused about how they were able to do that. So I was just curious, did it used to be a more spiritual thing where they could actually transform stuff and then slowly devolved, or if they just kind of took the word?
Yeah, magical energies are hereditary. So they come about through particular familial traditions and also particular ascetic practices.
Okay.
It's very hard to find the magic of that level that you would find in the Egyptian priests today.
But I think this is why, in I think a previous episode, maybe Here Be Demons or Here Be More Demons, you were talking about how, like, if you're going to go outside the church to find like an exorcist or someone to work through demonic influence, you're kind of going to want to find someone who has a tradition that's older than 1,000 years or so.
Yes.
Just because a lot of the newer stuff is very watered down and not based in tradition.
Yes.
So, anything you want to say there, Calvin?
I mean, I don't know anything about this.
Well, I guess what I would say is just that there's a big misapprehension between magic and versus like Orthodox ritual or versus Christian ritual. And that a much more proper way in the tradition of Justin Martyr, whose feast day was yesterday.
Yeah.
It's more proper to understand these things in relationship to the logos, which is made manifest in all of reality, as St. Maximus talks about, the thickening of the logos in nature and reality. And magic is an aspect of the thickening of the logos, which is the everyday expression of the medium of energies from God. And also the energies that participate in that reality, which is to say the angels and man. And some of those angels are fallen, but they still have the grace of participating in that energy. And that's what we might call, like in nowadays, like black magic or left-hand magic. Mm-hmm. But the point is that magic is just the energies of God, and as how it has a radiational effect in all of reality. And the masculine principle, which absorbs that feminine energy. So the respect to which we say magic as like a stereotypical like Christian Orthodox perspective is like evil or bad. I'm just saying like that's kind of a misapprehension of what magic actually is. And what magic is actually dealing with is, and this is why like Protestants have, like insofar you take their logic, like the most self-consistent Protestants, again, being like the Christian scientists, or people or Mormons who are just totally denying the Pharmakon whatsoever. It's like, well, if you really want to draw a line, then it's not just magic, it's any medicine, it's anything that has an effect on the mind. That is all Pharmakon. Pharmakon, I mean, as we call alcohol spirits, it's what goes into you as a spirit to cast out other demons. And the point of fact that the Orthodox totality understands is that these are things that God has given us in participation, that materiality participates in spirituality, and that there's not really this clear divisive division as the way that the modern West likes to think of it.
Mm-hmm. So kind of going along those lines, I think Marvel's given people this idea, or I guess especially in the Thor series, is that, oh, well, magic is just science we don't understand yet. What would you say to people who use that term to define magic?
There's really a truth to it, but I would inverse it. Science is magic we don't understand. And what I mean by that is, as Arthur C. Clarke, right? He says that all magic is insufficiently understood technology. Mm-hmm. But I would rather say technology is insufficiently understood magic. And this is kind of like what Julius Evoler going on would talk about, like the sense that magic, our technology itself, is just an extension of a very, very, very particular specific field of magic. Any technology, beginning with Adam and Eve, beginning with the putting on of the clothes to hide their nakedness, is a sort of magic. There is no escape from magic. Magic is always there. And the question is not whether or not to do magic, but how do we participate in magic in a way that is in relation to the original, in relation to the actual origin of the magical power, rather than a mediation that is deviating. So you have mediations of magic that have and maintain a relation to the original power, which is to say God. And then you have magics that are actually actively deviating or opposed to the original power, which is to say like the demonic power. And that's really where the question comes down to. And like in modernity or in modern language, that is usually referenced in like left or right hand path or whatever. But that's, kind of like a lot of BS and kind of deceptive. So you really have to understand the tradition of the church fathers, the traditions of the Platonists, to really understand what's going on there in relationship to magic that is drawing energy from the original source versus magic that is drawing energy from mediational sources that are actually opposed to the source.
I got nothing. Any questions you have at this point, Calvin?
So far, no.
So maybe we can move on to the relationship of shamanism.
Is this going to be related to totemism at all? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
So shamanism in general, and also the specific relationship between shamanism and psychoanalysis. And shamanism has always been this sort of universal archetypal culture that understood itself basically up until the point of modernity as a way of what we would nowadays call therapy. And shamanism was a unique method, sometimes involving Pharmakon in the direct sense.
So you have witch doctors a lot of times
that
seem to use Pharmakon.
Yes, which is to say drugs. But that was actually a minority. Most of whatever pharmacological shamanic cultures that use drugs were able to be attained to the same degree in situations without drugs. And it might be that the initial initiatory cultures may have had drugs, but they evolved to a point beyond that. I mean, you look at South America, and it's like a lot of the shamanistic cultures, if there's initiation with drugs or hallucinogenic drugs, the only extent to which that is maintained is through tobacco water, because tobacco water helps you maintain a connection to the spiritual realm, to the what we talked about before with like the astral realm. And having been therefore by extension being able to diagnose specific demonological qualities of spirits. But in and of itself, the Pharmakon is only a ladder, just like as Plato says in Phaedrus with language. It's a ladder to understanding something, but you have to be careful. You don't want to become tied to the ladder. That's what Wittgenstein says in Tractatus. Like, you have to knock down the ladder at the end of the day. So in that same respect, magic itself is kind of like a ladder to the ladder to divine ascent. But you have to be able to knock down the ladder. And you don't want to rely on the ladder, but you become attached to the method, the methodology. Same thing with art. Art always has to be art consciously and unconsciously, inevitably unconsciously, has some maintenance with the methodology that you're tied to, but you also have to break away from methodology to really create something original or unique or interesting. But you're always tied to that methodology. So it's a conversation or a dialectic between the methodology and the addiction to methodology, and actually going beyond methodology. Well, it's the same thing with magic or Pharmakon. And in that respect too, it's also that with shamanism, you rely maybe possibly to some degree on the superficialities or the mechanisms or the drugs or whatever to get to that particular point. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're able to train yourself to where you could just mentally go into, like in a very initiatory aspect. You have to have a hole. You have to have a hole that you go into, and it's the hole to the underworld. And that in the underworld, you meet all these specific spirits, and the spirits guide you back to the person you're working with therapeutically, which has always been also what psychoanalysis is doing, which psychoanalysis has always been this aspect of bringing someone into the unconscious or pharmacological or mystical or magical state where they're allowed to receive those energies. What Freud was basically doing as an alchemist was kind of permitting those energies in a way that was linguistically, ideologically applicable to this post-Enlightenment era, where he could translate that energetic, because the Protestant Revolution gave a void of any way to participate in that confessional culture. So Freud was very natural to come along and say, within the Enlightenment projection, this idea of how to participate in those universal archetypes that were tied to a more or less materialistic, scientific, and explicitly, consciously atheistic point of view of how to tap into the underworld. And this is also why Freud, in a very shamanic tradition, says that every psychoanalyst has to be psychoanalyzed themselves. Every shaman, every psychoanalyst has to die, has to go through analysis before they can properly perform the rites of initiation.
What exactly is a shaman?
A shaman is just the universal person that exists in pretty much every culture except modernity, that initiates a person and allows a person to come in contact with the spiritual realm. A shaman is a medium who acts as an intermediary between the world of the above and the world of below. As above, so below in the Hermetic tradition.
And in Christianity, the priest is kind of going to take the place of the shaman. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So the question then I would have is, in the modern world, aside from psychoanalysis, is there really a method for people to do this, like outside of the church, for people who don't have a priest?
In most Christian Orthodox cultures, there's always been this organic relation between the priest to someone you, in a very immediate fashion, you tell your sins to the general doctor. And then you have a monastery or monastic culture where you go to the guru or the monk or the elder or whatever. And that's your surgeon. That's the person who relates to you in a particular way. And with jouissance, with excessive focus on the sin. And that is your surgeon. And that was kind of the shaman. But nowadays, especially in the West, we don't really have that culture anymore. So there's more onus on the priest to perform that way, which isn't really the best possible scenario for a variety of reasons. And now we're sort of stuck in this void where we don't have a connection in any immediate everyday sense to the magical, to the extraordinary, to the above as below realm. So it's very hard to function today in the sense that most people throughout pagan or Christian or whatever cultures functioned, where we have an everyday immediate access to that sense of the shamanic culture of the spiritual realm.
So do you think this has made people more susceptible to hypnosis?
So yeah, I mean, hypnosis is kind of, again, like this modern like this modern way of maybe being able to access that without any of the trappings of like a metaphysical or a necessity of metaphysical tradition.
Yeah.
And it's like it's like a way of having your cake and eating it too.
Like I think a lot of people in the modern world, like you hear the word hypnosis and you immediately think of like a guy with spirally eyes waving the medallion. You are getting very sleepy. But like in reality, you know, like we have forms of hypnosis going on, like on the news, when you have like the newscaster looking right into your eyes, telling you like, this is the way things are. Like you should be agreeing with me.
So we've been hypnotized by Tucker Carlson.
And in a sense, yeah, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So you can't, what is it? Cuck the tuck. So
yeah.
He's kind of hypnotizing people in a sense. As are Anderson Cooper or like any of the other major hosts. So.
Yes, and that comes out of Mesmer, who really got a lot of his stuff from an Indian monk who was a part of the top caste, you know, so the Brahmin, and that was the tradition that led to Foucault, which led to Freud. So it all really chain links into that. But in either case, that is definitely the sense of reality that the media goes off to manipulate people in relationship to the whole media apparatus. You know, anything on television is kind of just this active manipulation or hypnotism.
Well, it's all just like morality now that's defined for you. Like you see on the news, there'll be something happens and the media will say, you should be outraged by this. Why aren't you need to be outraged by this thing? Because we are outraged by this thing. Or like, you should be in support of this thing because we are in support of this thing. And it's crazy to see now, especially online, how quick people are to jump on the bandwagon.
I mean, like 2 days ago, I think it was Joe Biden, like his Instagram just posted a picture of him like with a thumbs up and it said, enjoy your long weekend. And people got very upset because news were reporting that we should be upset about it. And I saw this video where people like looked through the comment sections of people who were super mad about it and then went to their profiles to see what they had posted for Memorial Day. And it was just them like drinking on the beach saying like have a nice long weekend. And it just kind of shows, that like if you're told you should be outraged by something, you automatically will be.
Why were people mad about?
Because he didn't tweet, I guess, like, thank you for our fallen soldiers.
Virtue signal.
Which like, like I can understand why some people would be upset, but people were upset even though they hadn't said what they wanted him to say, which was just kind of funny to me.
Yeah. So wait, mesmer is where the term mesmerize comes from, right? Yeah. So it's all kind of tied.
So to hypnotize someone, you would just have to like sit in front of a camera and look right at it and tell them stuff to think?
There are different degrees of hypnotism.
Okay.
And that degree happens to some degree already in a person laying on the couch in the psychoanalytic process. And it happens in a particular respect to someone who is an active hypnotist. But it happens in every respect to someone who has charisma, animal magnetism, typically the sort of people that get promoted in the news industry or media relations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, according to Mesmer, it's something basically innate. It can be trained, but it's always based on an innate quality of someone who has the attraction to bring people into them. And the animalistic or the animal magnetism aspect, you either got it or you don't. But the the with electricity becomes a particular proliferation of that on a mass scale, and the ability to manipulate people. I mean, again, I've said this several times in this podcast, but Edward Bernays and Century of the Self is totally, which is, on YouTube in the full, really just a documentary dealing with the entire proliferation of this quality, even if it doesn't really name it by ideas of shamanism or... We all still have access to shamanism, but the shamanism we access is mediated through technology of the media.
Yeah. Who's the most hypnotic person you've ever met? Like someone who...
That I've met in person.
Yeah. In person.
Probably that exorcist I was talking about in the last podcast.
Third-party exorcist guy?
Yeah.
What made him so hypnotic?
Well, he had that quality about him naturally, but also he was trained in specific magical traditions that encouraged that.
So he was literally hypnotic. Okay.
Yeah, I had friends who are more or less entirely secular who felt very violated after they met him.
Wow. Okay.
What do you mean violated? Like they just felt like he had... What exactly?
Gone into their mind.
Oh. Weird.
And... produced illusions.
Do you think he had? Like, has he done that to you at least?
No, he hasn't done it to me.
Okay.
But he did it to my friends.
So I agree with you that I think it's something you either have or you don't. You are kind of born charismatic and hypnotic, or like you aren't. And it's very interesting to me at times when people can take public speaking classes or people can take training to try to become better at this sort of thing. But like I can always kind of tell if they're just playing off of a script that they've read in school or if they naturally have this quality. So what is it that defines or determines, I guess, how someone's going to have these traits? What's going to be the indicating factor that like someone's charismatic, or like how are we really defining these things?
There's not a scientific definition. It's mostly intuition. But you know it because you know it in the spark of their eye. And the eye is the window to the soul. And that's where you really begin to understand the person. I mean, one activity you can do with very close friends or with a lover, if you have one, is just to stare into their eyes for several minutes. And in that respect, you begin to really understand who they are in a deep way. There's a lot of deep truth that is typically neglected. And the idea that the eye is the pathway to the soul, because the soul exposes itself so much in the vision of sight. Aristotle says that the vision of sight is the ultimate vision. It's the ultimate sense because that's the sense by which we come about to knowledge. But it's also the sense to which other people come to knowledge of who we are deep inside. Out of all the lights of the body, the eye is the light that exposes the most in a glass-like fashion.
So there's a ton of people today that are very uncomfortable with making eye contact, I've noticed. And even, I think, eye contact has become even more important over the past year with everyone else's facial expressions being covered up by masks all the time. But still, people are very hesitant to make eye contact for long periods of time. Why have people gotten so uncomfortable with making eye contact with others?
I think people know that deep down that eyes are the aspect that reveals so much of who we are. And they're very shy about that because as technology increases, we have to increasingly divide, demarcate, and reserve parts of who we really are for social capital. So the eyes intuitively become a very vulnerable spot of understanding who the other person is, despite all the bullshit that we try to portray to people.
But then people turn around immediately and like glue their eyes to their phones or like to the TV or whatever for hours on end and just absorb everything that comes in from, those little windows.
I find it's easier to, if someone's like not making eye contact, Jacob, you should lick your lips. They might.
That make them make eye
contact
more?
Make them
really?
feel more comfortable, yeah.
Why does that make people feel more comfortable?
You should just try it next time you see
So you
someone
lick
on
your
the
lips?
bus.
I feel like that would make you uncomfortable.
No, next time you're like sitting across from like a person on the bus, just make eye contact and lick your lips.
I feel like that looks a little,
No,
seductive.
it works. Trust
Can
me.
you give me an example of when it's worked for you?
Okay. Yesterday it
Yeah.
happened. Yeah. I think you should just try it.
Where did it happen yesterday?
Do you believe me or no?
No, I very much believe that, but from a Freudian point of view.
Well, the licking of the lips just is kind of what throws me for a loop, you know? I feel like that would make someone, I feel like I'd get a little bit uncomfortable. Someone's just looking straight at me and starts like salivating. Like, maybe I'm wrong.
Well, they feel uncomfortable continuing to look at the lips, so they look at the eyes instead.
Yeah, it gives us a distraction, Jacob. Yeah.
Okay.
We should have done that. We had an idea yesterday. We went to White Castle and I wanted to see what would happen if I just said, hey, can I come to the back and do some dishes for you guys?
What did they say?
Well, I didn't. I got nervous, but I'm saying I bet they would have if I licked my lips. That was the point of what I'm saying. Do you think they would?
We weren't wearing masks though.
Yeah.
They might have been like, whoa, you have to wear a mask.
Do you think a store would let you do that? A restaurant?
Maybe outside of America. I don't know about here.
Okay. All right.
You
There's
probably
like
drank
a
any
little
of your
like-
cocktail, Calvin.
What?
You probably drank any of your cocktail.
I've had some of it. I
How
keep
much? Are you
drinking.
needing a hand?
I,
with that?
I take small sips of it. I had my food license, food carrier
He was
license.
ready to go.
I was ready to go. I want to go back. But yeah. So no, I would just do that, Jacob, if you find that people don't like looking at you.
Maybe I'm just ugly. What can I say? People don't want to make eye contact with me. There's also like a social limit to, you know, how long you can make eye contact with someone before it becomes like socially inappropriate or whatever. Like you can make eye contact for maybe 5 or 6 seconds when you're having a conversation, and then you're almost expected to look away from the person, and then like you can look back or whatever. I don't know if that's just like not to intimidate or whatever.
I always just keep eye contact with people.
Straight eye contact the whole
Yeah.
time. No, you don't.
Do you
No,
look
you
away from
don't.
people? Like you don't.
No, people have told me that they feel violated because of how much direct attention I pay to the eyes.
Huh.
I've never felt that, but also Corey and I normally talk in like a group setting, I feel like. So
Yeah.
we're having to constantly shift eye contact with different people. But
I'm very much an eye contact person.
yeah. I feel like I've gotten worse about it. I used to be really good about eye contact. But anyways. Back on track to where we're on hypnosis and
Yeah, hypnosis.
its kind of traits in the modern world. And then shamanism. So what were we jumping to after that, Corey?
Was it the relationship between shamanism and psychoanalysis? But I feel we've
Did we miss something?
covered that pretty sufficiently.
It was the Pharmakon. And
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
Pharmakon,
yeah.
just in the sense of Plato's use, words, language, or drugs, or magic, that always unites us to a medium, a media that's higher to truth, but also in that process constrains us. And language, magic, drugs, they give us access to a higher mediation of truth, but they also restrain us simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always this initiatory process with drugs and language. But that's the point of mysticism. That's the point of St. Dionysius of Areopagi, pertaining to language as an access to the higher forms of reality, but also being able simultaneously to negate the ladder of divine ascent, the ladder of the language that we use to access the ineffable.
Mm-hmm. That's very structuralist, I'd say. You know, like the more knowledge we gain, or the more we understand, you know, the more we're restricted by that.
Unless we
knowledge.
know.
And the less we know. Yeah.
With the hypnotic thing, though, if someone does have that trait, do you think they should try to not use it to the like as much as they
That's a good
can?
question.
It's inevitable. I mean, in that respect, it depends. If you have that trait, it's a gift of God. And it's your choice, it's your free will of how you go about using that trait.
Okay. But do you think people should be somewhat careful if they do have that trait?
With great power, with great gifts comes great responsibility, right?
All right.
So those traits or those gifts of charisma, They bring about a higher degree of totality of judgment.
All right. I'm making eye contact
Yeah,
with
we're
you
making
now.
some intense
I'm
eye
not
contact.
uncomfortable.
Have you seen the film Rotoscope, Waking Life by Linklater, Richard Linklater?
I have not.
What year?
It's like early 2000s. He did a
What's
lot
it called?
of
Rotoscope?
yeah, he did a lot of stuff in Austin. And rotoscope is when you film something, but then you draw over it.
Yeah,
So it's kind of like
yeah.
an animation.
Okay.
Linklater is very good. He's kind of like Jodorowsky in a way, but more contemporary. I would say that he has a Waking Life, the film where he interviews a disciple of Andre Bazin. Trying to remember his name. He taught at the New School. I had met with him. But he talks a lot about the holy moment and the aspect of eye contact and being in the real. So Andre Bazin, who was a Catholic film philosopher, he would talk about how our reality is constantly God's art in that respect. Film. I think I talked about this in the episode on photography. Film is a particularly immanent aspect of God's art or God's reality. And eye contact in that respect is sort of an immediate participation in reality as understood through the artist as a manifestation of God's design.
Do you think then like social media is bad? If you're talking about like the like reality, like do you think that social media is bad since it kind of makes a fake reality, or I don't know if fake's the right word, but an alternate reality that people can live in pretty fully? Do you think that's unhealthy?
I mean, the inescapable is that alternate reality is also a participant in reality of the Godhead. So, or the emanation of the Godhead. It's hard to escape from the fact that reality is just as much a reality as eye contact with the real or some sort of Heideggerian relationship to being. These are all degrees of participation in the Godhead, in the sense of like Eckhart, Meister Eckhart, of all of reality, regardless of the degrees of participation, the directness or indirectness of that reality or participation in the Godhead. But that's where judgment comes into the respect that the individual is perceived and the conscious, which is to say, from Meister Eckhart, we come to Kierkegaard, where our consciousness is the divine rule of the Godhead and the subjective apprehension of the objective, of how we understand the Godhead in relationships to ourselves and the mediation that has been provided us in a particular point of history. It's tempting to say that I can't be a good Christian because I was not an apostle, I was not a disciple when Jesus was born or when Jesus was around. But at the same time, it's like Jesus is eternal and the incarnation of the eternal. So I always have to be the apostle or the disciple in relationship to reality and being as the eternality of Jesus' incarnation, the historical incarnation of Christ manifest in the eternal. So I have no excuse to be or not to be in this experience sense. I have to constantly live up to the participation of that reality, which is trans-eternal or trans-temporal. So I can't just delay my responsibility to that being in respect to the fact that I exist 2,000 years after Christ.
I'd say this is reflected a lot, and even a phrase that I've heard pop up a lot recently in evangelical churches, like, "Oh, well, we have to return to a first century church. We have to return to, the roots of Christ's church in the first century, or whatever." And like what you're saying, Corey, I think is that we're not limited by like the time that we're in, and we can't use that as an excuse to say, like, justify that we are not living out our lives like the apostles, that we're not living out our lives like we know Christ in that material, personal sense. Am I right in that?
Yes.
Okay.
We can't say like, oh, Christianity has happened and the councils and Catholic Church and Protestantism, so I just have to be like a good, cultural manifestation of a goody two shoes. I can't take responsibility for my actions because my actions are just participatory in the everyday excess of jouissance, the everyday excess of culture.
Mm-hmm.
What Christianity actually demands is a individual subjectivity of relationship to the objective divine, of the code of the actual Godhead and what that demands, and that every day we actually have to live as Christ lives. We can't excuse it through historical or cultural, mediary, transitory aspects when what we're actually trying to relate to is an eternal aspect of the divine.
So let me contrast that with accelerationism then, because you have other people who are, and this is like a very small minority, but they're almost kind of pushing for the end of times to come or whatever, for Christ to return. And it seems like this is a growing group of people who are arguing like, oh, well, yeah, we should be living every day like it's the end of the world or whatever. But then they'll use that as an excuse to live like this hedonist lifestyle or to like do terrible things because they think it would bring us closer to, say, like the second coming or whatnot.
Like try to fulfill prophecies, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, weird.
Yeah. So there's like mainstream accelerationism, which is like detached from Christianity. And that would be people who are like pushing for like a decline in society. But then you have like Christian accelerationism, which is like you have evangelical groups who are very Zionist, who have basically funded and paid for materials for the temple to be reconstructed in Jerusalem. So like one of the examples is there's this big warehouse in Lebanon where basically all of the biblical requirements for the temple require a bunch of cedar from Lebanon, and all the cedar that is needed to rebuild the temple is located in this warehouse right now. They're just waiting for the right time to, I guess, bring it to the Dome of the Rock and tear it down and rebuild the temple or whatnot. So
now, if you built that, would that actually bring the end of times closer?
Well, that's
and
the
if
question,
you like destroyed that warehouse, would that make the end times like farther away? Can you actually control when the end times are happening to that degree?
Yeah. Is it? I don't know. Would you say it's foolhardy to be accelerationist, Corey? Or because I think in the Orthodox Church, Zionism is considered heretical, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, these are very much delusions. Not.
You can't just like, oh, I'll bring Christ back sooner if I just go build the temple.
I mean, so much of orthodoxy really goes back to what the Stoics said, like everything outside of us is beyond us and we have no control over it. And it's ridiculous, or in the Freudian sense, it's a defense mechanism to participate in these false realities where we have any mechanism of control.
Mm-hmm.
What we have control over is our individual actions and our virtue. And that's where the kingdom of God is. It's within ourselves in respect to how we act and how we participate in love and relationship to other people. Politics come and go, and it's God's decree when the Antichrist comes. There's not really anything we can do about it. We just have to understand that. That is a reality that is coming, but we have to be loving and care for everyone, regardless of any judgments we have of them. There's not any direct participation or wisdom in bringing about the Antichrist. It comes when God has already willed it. So there's not any point in caring about it. I guess
other
I'm
than
saying
simply saying, I hate the Antichrist.
I guess my point is that accelerationism is a misfocus of where our energies should go. It's
Mhm.
not the energies of bringing about the end times or bringing about the inevitable, but where the energy should go is love of neighbor and caring for a fellow man.
Yeah. So there you go.
This is unrelated, but where did you get that shirt?
When I was living in North Carolina
Okay, it's a cool
with the
shirt.
poet who grew tea, he gave me this shirt as a present.
Okay, that's a cool shirt.
Yeah,
Did you
It's a
say
very
you
cool
grew
shirt.
grew tea?
yeah. Well, I think I mentioned that, but I lived with the poet in North Carolina who grew tea on his farm, and I was living in a log cabin, and he had us provide to a tea house in Asheville called High Climate. And when I came back to Kentucky, he sent me this shirt through the mail. So I wore it to Pascha because I feel it's a very Paschal shirt.
It's very colorful.
Yeah. But the idea that death represented through the skull becomes life, that by death he conquers death. So that was the motif that made it a good gift.
Hmm. Yeah,
It's a
and
good
it's
shirt.
it's,
It's
it's
a good
almost like
shirt.
Latin American, I would say,
Mhm.
with like the
Yeah,
the
Frida
life and
Kahlo.
death there, whatnot. Yeah.
So we are closing in on the end of the 50-minute hour. Are there any things you'd like to close with? Any last words?
I guess what I was trying to get at the whole thing is that you have to be very careful about how you understand and interpret or misinterpret the ideas of magical powers and magical powers. And that magic itself is tied to the intrinsic nature of how the logos manifest itself in reality.
Mhm.
So I would say, like, for instance, what's very big nowadays or how it manifests in everyday culture is the witch. But you have to understand that people who call themselves witches are not really witches. What a witch is someone who uses demonic powers to curse people.
Mhm.
It's not magic per se. And in that respect, you have to be very forgiving and understanding of these people, that they're really just trying to relate to what Christianity always has been in a Protestant culture. And that these are people who are feasting and looking forward to and anticipating the return of orthodoxy or the return of Christianity in its true form. So you can't be judgmental or disparaging of these people. These are people, more so than most, who hunger and thirst for true religion.
Are these like the people who collect crystals and
Yeah, like neo-pagans,
Okay.
New Age, whatever. These are people who are actually much closer to orthodoxy than most people realize. They're much closer to orthodoxy than the vast majority. So you have to be very patient and you have to be very kind and loving to these people, because these are the people who deepen their soul into it, magnanimity of existence beyond their everyday life. Whereas most people have been totally sold and wrapped up in modernity to think that everyday existence and the magnanimity of life is in the self. But the so-called witches or New Age people have understood that that's a lie and that it's actually beyond themselves. So they're looking to all these traditions or whatever they can get a hold of to explicate and understand that reality. And that reality is in Christianity, but they're intuitively much closer than most other people are.
Wow. Yeah.
all right. There you have it. We will see you next time.
I'll see you next time.
And take care, y'all.